DanDaDan is the utterly insane story about aliens, spirits, a hot grandma, two hot grandmas, I'm just kidding, one hot grandma, and of course a guy losing his whole dick and balls. One part Monster of the Week paranormal battle anime and one part brain-melting psychedelic fever dream that would make Fooly Cooly blush, DanDaDan has taken the anime world by storm in the latter half of 2024. But my favorite episode has nothing to do with any of that, and in a beautiful backstory scene with less dialogue than the words of this intro, DanDaDan gives us the heartbreaking story of two characters dealing with grief and loss in their own ways in an absolute masterclass of anime storytelling. This is DanDaDan's perfect episode. Episode 7, To a Kinder World, is the culmination of a 2-episode arc involving Aira Shiratori, a character that, even in an anime filled with likable characters, instantly became my ride or die in this series. This Delulu queen believes she is God's prettiest soldier, a literal divine chosen one, enacting his will, namely being the most popular and cool girl in school. What's not to like? All of this because she found an otherworldly golden sphere that seemed to coincide with some very strange things in Aira's life. And yeah, it is one of Okarun's missing balls.
My balls are gone!
In touching this priceless artifact though, something awakens in Aira. In DanDaDan's world, the line between being an average person and being able to experience the supernatural is razor thin, and all it takes is one little push into that latent potential. And Aira having direct contact with Okarun's you-know-what is what sets this whole mini arc into motion, especially since, for the first time since her awakening, she realizes that something or someone is following her. Believing all of this to be Momo Ayase's fault, of course, she organizes her little gang of popular girls to ambush Momo in an abandoned industrial building and use her powers as God's chosen warrior to exorcise the demonic wings right out of our psychic main girl, all by rubbing Okarun's... You know what, never mind, continue. However, all of this comes to a head as the spirit that Aira saw stalking her outside of the school shows up in the warehouse, a yokai dubbed the acrobatic Silky. The spirit calls Aira by name, claiming to be her mother, before the real battle begins. And right in the middle of the action, episode 7 does something decidedly a little different. The episode opens with a woman gasping for air, running through an empty city street. This is just a glimpse and we're transported back into the present where the battle rages on. As the acrobatic Silky's movements have grown more erratic, the ghost ends up caught in the beams and pillars of the warehouse, unable to move, and allowing Okarun to strike the final blow and defeat the ghost with one powerful attack. But in the chaos, something unexpected has happened. Aira Shiratori is dead. A woman wakes up in a fancy hotel room to the sound of her alarm and a shower running in the other room. A TV tuned to nothing hums in the background. On the counter is a handful of bills that marks the transaction. The woman walks alone through the downtown streets of the city, and we get this overwhelming feeling of disconnection and loneliness. It's not until she passes by a storefront and sees a familiar red dress that we see a flicker of something in her eyes. But it's only momentary as she continues on her way. As she gets to the door of her apartment, we're ready to see just how alone this woman truly is. Just the act of putting the key to the keyhole seems to be a Herculean effort. She pauses, catching her breath for what we can only assume is the sheer loneliness that is this empty home. When something we're not expecting happens as she opens the door. The woman's daughter rushes through the door, and suddenly the weight of the world is lifted from her shoulders. In that moment, her world has a little more light in it. And this begins the montage that comprises the bulk of this episode. We see the woman return to more jobs, a janitor, a convenience store worker, and all the while she seems lifeless and dejected. From a color theory standpoint, these scenes are framed so that we see her work environment as desaturated and monotone, whereas the world around her brims with all sorts of color, which is almost certainly how she views her place in the world. She is just another face in the crowd. But when she returns home, we see her with her daughter, teaching her the fundamentals of dancing and enjoying home-cooked meals. We can see how tired she is as the days go by. We see this little girl grow up in real time, and her mother working the entire time. Her only reprieve, her only moments worth living for, are these moments she gets to spend with her daughter. Eventually, after all this time working multiple dead-end jobs, she takes some money out of what she saved to purchase the thing that sparked a bit of life in her eyes right in the beginning of this flashback, that same red ballet dress. The day plays out with this little girl receiving this beautiful dress, getting her height marked on the apartment wall, and eventually the girl blows out all 5 candles on her birthday cake. It was her birthday. We know this meant the world to the woman. We even see the day marked on the calendar. The money she took out from the envelope, all the money she had in the world, was to give her daughter one special day. Which what makes what comes next all the more devastating. There's no easy way to talk about this subject matter, and it's never explicitly said what the cause or even the aftermath of this event is. A group of Yakuza men break into the woman's home, leaving her for dead and taking their daughter to be trafficked, or worse, continuing this hellish cycle all over again. From the man looking in the envelope, it's clear that the woman was working for them or owed them money. We already knew she took some of the money out of the envelope for her daughter's birthday. Whatever money she owed these reprehensible men, she came up short, and this was the punishment. With one final gasp of motherly love, the woman tears through the streets on the trail of the men who kidnapped her daughter, when she finally succumbs to her wounds and dies. And in her dying moments, we see her envision herself, not as she is or how we've seen her, but how she could have been, how she wanted to be. A beautifully talented ballet dancer dancing freely on these surrealist dreamscape rooftops. And suddenly it all makes sense. We can see through this context that being a ballerina was always her dream, and a dream she tried to live out vicariously through providing a better life for her daughter. She sacrificed everything for her daughter to have a better life than she did, to come closer to her dreams than she ever could have. And she failed. Even though in this moment she's free to dance beautifully in this strange, hazy rooftop purgatory, she can't help but come to terms with the fact that she's left her daughter behind. And so, with one final jump, one last rejection of life, afterlife, and anything else, she jumps from the rooftop with a sickening thud. Japanese ghost stories are usually tied to the trauma of specific places and events. Think of The Ring, The Grudge, Pulse, basically any J-horror movie ever. The ghosts in these stories are just as derived from traditional folklore as the acrobatic Silky, who is an amalgam of a few different urban legends, the most obvious being the acrobatic Sera, or the Aku Sera. But the one thing these spirits have in common is the inability to move on from the place or circumstance of their death, which in turn binds them to the world of the living. And so we see the woman haunting this street in her afterlife, no longer able to remember what it is she even lost. That is, until
Mommy?
a child Aira walks up to the ghost and calls it Mommy, and in that moment the ghost remembers not the specifics of her life, but the one important thing, her daughter. This rage, this vengeance, this all-consuming obsession in the wake of her death transforms her into the yokai, into the acrobatic Silky. And she begins once again looking for her daughter, but this time, unable to remember any details, locks on to Aira, and we can only assume has been following her ever since. But this isn't just an origin story for the spirit, because Aira's confusion that the ghost is her mother is quickly, devastatingly corrected by her father. There's no way the ghost or anyone could be her mother, because her mother's dead. Aira's still too young to realize what's going on, but her father tries to explain it in terms a child could understand. As her body is being taken away, her father leaves her with the words, "You just have to be okay without her here, so that when you see her again, she'll be proud of you." A ghost looking for a daughter, and a young girl wishing to speak one last word to her mother. As Aira lies dead, acrobatic Silky approaches Momo and Okarun with an ultimatum. She wishes to give her life to Aira. By transferring her aura, her life energy, through Momo as a conduit, she can save Aira's life. Momo and Okarun are skeptical, assuming this is just some kind of trick, but the demon slits its own jaws, making it unable to attack. All acrobatic Silky wants is for this girl to live. We flash back to the spirit giving her life force, her aura, to Aira, and we see this all play out through Momo's eyes as her life transfers, and it works. Aira wakes up. But without being able to move on, without being able to reconcile her regrets, Turbo Granny tells us that her soul will move on into the void, lost forever, eternally banished from the afterlife. Acrobatic Silky, now able to remember her life as the woman, goes through all of her regrets as her body disintegrates, that she wishes she would have bought her daughter more dresses, played with her more. She laments all of her shortcomings as a mother with the statement, "If you were someone else's daughter, you would have been so much happier." But then, we see those familiar footsteps, a daughter rushing home to the sound of her mother's voice. It's Aira. The other side of this story is a daughter that wished to say just one more thing to her mother, a daughter that didn't want anything more from her mother, a daughter that understood the endless sacrifices a parent makes, and above all else, a daughter that was happy, not with material items or with grand gestures or with money, but with a life spent together. As these two stories collide, a mother that only wished a better life for her daughter and a daughter that just wanted to see her mother one last time, we have the catharsis of both of these characters. As the two embrace, we can only assume that the woman can now finally move on at peace. This is by far my favorite episode of DanDaDan, and honestly maybe my favorite single episode of anime of this entire year. From the subtle but universal storytelling, to the beautiful waltzy piano soundtrack that rises to a crescendo with the emotional story on screen, to just how much it humanizes two characters that we're introduced to as villains, as enemies of Momo and Okarun. This, above all else, is what I'm going to remember DanDaDan Season 1 for. The episode says so much without even saying a single word, leaving us to put the pieces together for ourselves for this heartbreaking story of parents, children, dreams, and regrets. The ambiguity of this story just makes things even more heartbreaking, as we have no idea what really led to this place and can only really wonder. Was the mother quitting prostitution for jobs that her daughter could have been proud of, as we see her crumple the bills on the nightstand? Does her quitting provoke the retaliation by the men she worked for? Did she owe the Yakuza money before all of this even started, prompting her to get into this line of work? Or was getting involved in that life a last-ditch attempt to provide a better life for her child? And of course, what tragic fate befell the daughter when the men took her away? We don't know. All we know is that Aira's wish to grant both of their spirits peace and guide them to a kinder world seems to have, at least in spirit, reunited the two, wherever they may be now. Thank you guys for checking out the channel and watching this video. A big shout out to all my Patreon supporters over on Patreon and my YouTube channel members here on YouTube. Thank you guys so much. Your support really helps me in doing these videos. And if you want to see more content about anime storytelling, deep dives on themes and characters and nerdy shit like that, you can check out my Patreon. Even $1 really helps, but there's all sorts of tiers. You could get access to my Discord, to live watches of certain series, and live reads of manga. Currently, there's Delicious in Dungeon, Witch Hat Atelier, and maybe a few more to come. Maybe even DanDaDan in the near future. So thank you guys. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, all that YouTube junk, and until next time.